This is Denis Rancourt. On April 2020, 5 months after the pandemic was declared, he published a review paper on Researchgate about how masks were ineffective in preventing influenza-like illnesses. The paper was peer-reviewed, critically acclaimed, and applauded by the entire scientific community. I'm kidding, that shit was banned to high hell, quicker than you can say, I'm Canadian, I'm unvaccinated, and I want to get on that train. The paper is titled Masks Don't Work, a review on the science relevant to COVID-19 social policy. Along with his own observations on particle transmission physics, Rancourt's paper outlines other studies which ascertains the insufficiencies and even the potential harms of wearing protection face masks. In this video, I'm going to delve into and explore the points made by Rancourt in his paper, just to really see if this information gatekeeping done by Researchgate is at all warranted. A major argument he presents is predicated on aerosol transmission, a proven primary pathway for virulent diseases to infect hosts. His foremost point on the cause of transmission was this: as humidity of the surrounding environment increases, the transmission effect decreases. Basically, if the air is getting thick, you ain't getting sick. This idea of humidity being the ultimate driving force for spikes in seasonal influenza is a collusion collated from many papers such as by Harper, Lowen, Halls, and Vabood. The pertinent point he elaborated on was regarding a paper by Shaman 2010, a paper wherein lies a quote that is often seen in many other such related studies. Shaman's findings also implied on the true influence of the basic reproductive number, R0 for short. It's essentially just a number that represents the average number of individuals that can be infected from a single infected person within a susceptible population. So high bad, low good. Shaman pointed to the notion that dryness of the air is the primary cause for a high R0 during the pandemic, and generally not arising from certain citizens' non-compliance towards face mask policy. But surely masks can help reduce the spread of it, or at least allow the wearer to control transmission to some degree, right? Well, even I find that hard to wholeheartedly deny, but let's just delve a little deeper into the literature he reviews here. Furthering the point for face mask inefficacy, Rancourt's paper talks about the variant form of COVID, which is the smaller and actually infectious form of a virus before being assimilated into a host cell. According to Fair, 2015, it is typically 0.13 microns in size, and can be as small as 0.06 microns wide. Now, compare that to the filter pore size of the ostensibly most protective N95 mask, which is around 0.3 to 0.5 microns wide. It'll take the quickest of maths for you to imagine how penetrable COVID can actually be to mask wearers. To make things worse, the mean pore size of the more commonly worn surgical masks, the ones that everyone you see wears, as found by Leonis 2003, can be as large as 16.9 microns wide. Now, I absolutely do not need to, but I'm going to compare this to the Battle of Helm's Deep. No matter how valiant of an effort Legolas made, he couldn't stop the torchbearer from rupturing the deeping wall. He couldn't stop the inevitable. A giant 1 to 130 sized gaping hole for the orcs to pour into the valley. Sure, in the end the good guys still won the battle, but the way I see it, Aeden's sunlit speech before riding out of the gates of the Hornburg and routing the orcs with Gandalf is a perfect analogy to having strong, horse-healthy, and valorous immunity. So as far as wearing surgical masks is concerned, it's definitely starting to seem to me to just be a formality at this point. Going back to Rancourt's paper, he details the pore size argument in conjunction with the minimum infective dose, or MID for short. From referencing multiple studies, it's basically implied that it takes very little to infect someone. Like very, very little. Less than 1 virion carrying aerosol particle little. This, from Yesley Otter 2011, the 50% probability MID easily fits into a single aerolized droplet. This probability refers to the minimum amount of exposure the virus needs to successfully infect 50% of individuals in a given setting, similar in concept to the LD50. This is the point I believe that ties Rancourt's disbelief all together. Even though masks can afford an arguable degree of protection, and that degree is often placed at 80% for some reason, the incomplete protection by virtue of the tiny size of the variants renders masks practically useless to deter infection, since it takes so damn little to become infected with the virus. While compiling all the papers referenced by Rancourt, it is evident to me that he has presented a compelling, albeit zealous review of mask effectiveness. An appropriate response to his paper, I think, would be to critically peer review it, to let it stand the test of scrutiny. Instead of being removed from the site and having his account banned, I definitely don't believe it warrants such reprisal. Considering the number of papers that exist in other journals that come to the same conclusion, no significant reduction in infection. Briefly stepping away from Rancourt's paper, we can find that there is plenty of literature out there that even point to the adverse effects of mask use. For example, reduced oxygenation in surgeons after prolonged mask use, potential respiratory acidosis, increased chance of infection for cloth mask users due to moisture retention and poor circulation, significant leakage jets for mask wearers instilling false sense of security, and generally not necessary for healthy individuals, and this coming straight from the Journal of the American Medical Association. This last point I can personally stand behind. I grew up in a city that suffered one of the worst epidemics in the 21st century, being Hong Kong, a period where every citizen became an unidentifiable statistic. It was an interesting case study for mask use, just due to the fact that Hong Kong is the most densely populated city on Earth. Practically everyone wore masks when they were on tightly packed trains or rubbing shoulders in the maze of blocks that is Mongkok. Strangely, in Japan, it is acknowledged that mask use isn't recommended for preventing influenza. It's still worn by the public in flu seasons though, because culturally it just acts as a good reflection of good personal hygiene. It's fair to say that Hong Kong and many other Asian countries have a certain aptitude when it comes to mask use. Even so, while I was serving my sentence in a local Hong Kong primary school, every time a classmate had a cold but still made it to school, because even a typhoon-induced car crash wouldn't be a good enough excuse to miss school, he'd be wearing a mask, which is fine, because he's sick. He's infected with the flu, thus he's trying to do good by putting on a mask. Good for him. To round up on Rancourt's censored review, I'll end on a study that he referenced. An experiment conducted by A.C.K. Lai et al. 2011 found that when using mannequins to test source to susceptible transmission, leakages from pathways around face masks decreased protection degree by a significant amount. And in many other related studies, you will often find prefaced statements such as this by Lai, a statement that I believe is the crux of what this whole fiasco is about. Scientific data on effectiveness of face masks in reducing infections in the community are extremely limited and even inconsistent. I guess this is the point that I'm trying to get across here. We can't confidently say that face masks are effective in preventing illness. Therefore, considering the potential adverse effects of doing so, this physically personal and intrusive practice shouldn't be enforced onto the human populace, especially if they are not sick. Mask wearing in public should be allowed, available, and hell, why not even recommended, but definitely not mandated. I'm going to cite a passage from the paper that I find pretty poignant. It goes, "The present paper about masks illustrates the degree to which governments, the mainstream media, and institutional propagandists can decide to operate in a science vacuum, or select only incomplete science that serves their interests. Such recklessness is also certainly the case with the current global lockdown of over 1 billion people, an unprecedented experiment in medical and political history." Anyway, this video is meant to throw attention to the censorship and disavowing of conflicting views and evidence, the removal of certain peoples from established platforms, which in itself does not help the credulity of those who censor in the first place. Unless someone is mouthing off to your mom or about to spoil the finale of The Sopranos, why would you try and shut them up?
People should not be walking around with masks.